Okay, hi. So today I'm going to talk about La Presse and the Montreal Gazette. If nothing else, you'll know a little bit more about Montreal papers when you get to EGMC. So this paper is really a paper about, as much about mistaken assumptions and exceptional circumstances as anything. When I first got to Montreal in 2009 as an American scholar, I noticed that Francophone journalists were very publicly critical of online news in a way that I didn't feel like Anglophone journalists were. And I was very surprised at that, especially coming from the United States, to see the level of sort of disdain that I saw from several journalists about online. And some Francophone Montreal papers around that time had scarcely any online presence, weren't interested in archiving, weren't interested in engagement. So I wondered about what was going on, and I thought, well, maybe this is a case of digital divide, because we know that there are fewer Francophones online than Anglophones in Quebec, partially for economic reasons, partially for other reasons. And so I decided to pick two Montreal newsrooms, the La Presse and the Gazette, and go in and interview people about what was going on in the newsroom. So in Montreal, I picked two papers, first of all, that had a long history in the city, dating back, the Gazette calls itself one of the oldest continuously published newspapers in North America, and the Gazette and the La Presse dates back over 100 years. So they both have long histories in the city, and they both the workers of both papers are represented by labor unions, different labor unions with different labor traditions in the city. Francophone unions had traditionally been stronger than Anglophone unions, and I was wondering about what was going on there as well. And Anglo papers in Canada, as you might, in Montreal, as you might imagine, compete with U.S. papers and national Canadian papers. Francophone papers don't, so I wondered if that was connected to different attitudes towards online engagement as well. So basically, I and a group of other folks went in and interviewed people at the Gazette and La Presse, and we wanted to find out how the people who are working in online specifically, differed in how they described the benefits and disadvantages of online news. And we wondered for them and for their own work practices and overall, and we wondered whether the differences would change over time as both outlets develop their approach to online news. So we went in 2010, and we went in 2013. And during that time, as you'll see, both papers underwent big changes. So La Presse is founded in 1884. It's now the flagship paper of a chain called the Geske Group, a small chain. In 2009, just before we went in, they had a closure crisis. The publisher threatened to close the paper and achieve some labor concessions to keep it open. In 2013, around the time that the interviewers were interviewing, they shifted to an iPad-first production, which I'll talk about, I can talk about more in the questions period, but basically they spent $40 million, hired over 100 people, new people, and shifted to a tablet-first, and in this case iPad-first, because they were using iPad production, taking this gamble that tablet was going to be the wave of the future, and convincing everyone on staff that it was important for the paper's survival. So in 2010, when we went in the wake of the closure crisis, there had also been a reorganization. When the reporters and editors that we talked about what life was like at the paper, they articulated a crisis that had been resolved. They said things like, we arrived in a paper world where people didn't know what the web was, there was a lot of tension, but they described that tension as being largely over by 2010, although some folks said that there was still residual tension. And they said that the tension had been resolved because of careful logistical planning, careful placement of where of where digital news was in the newsroom, and by the enthusiasm and the kind of the efforts of the editors to integrate staff. In 2013, we went back, and as I said, there had been this huge shift. And a shift, by the way, that La Presse did without really alerting many other Montreal news workers that this was going on, which is very difficult when you hire 100 people in a small town. So La Presse was re-envisioned by the publisher as a tablet-first product and a product specifically to highlight what they felt were the strengths of La Presse. So the folks that had been working on digital stuff before were often given prestige projects within the tablet version. When we went in, we heard several really interesting things. A lot of people said that they believed that the tablet would save the paper. And one of the ways that they talked about that was that they said that the issue was that advertising agencies were refusing to sell ads to print. That it wasn't the advertisers themselves that were the issue. It was advertising agencies that didn't want to sell to print anymore. So they had to come up with a new platform in order to get ads at all. Which I thought was pretty interesting. And so they talked about this renovation as potentially saving the paper. They also talked about, in some cases, this increase in staff had given some workers less work duties than they had before, less in the past. So a substantial number of reporters started talking about how they had more time to think, more time to produce longer content, longer investigative pieces, because on the tablet they were having more space, and so much energy was involved in making this a prestige project. At the same time, we noticed that there was a tension between the older digital workers, we'll say, and the new iPad folks, who were described in derogatory terms by some of the older workers as hipsters, people who sang cassette, cocktail hours, people with tattoos on their arms. We noticed that there was this new emergent tension between web and tablet. And also, significantly, all of those 100 people have been brought on with different labor contracts as the rest of the newsroom. There was a provision in their labor contract that they could be laid off after a period of time if things weren't working out. And the web folks made sure that we know about that. Okay, so that's what we found at the Presse, at the Gazette. Very, very different situation. Gazette, as I said, very, very old newspaper. It was... up until the 1960s, had fairly consistent ownership, but since the 1960s, it has shifted from Southern to Financial Press to Hollinger to Canwitz to Post Media. Lots of different changes. So these changes have come with increasing staff reductions. So at the same time that they were going through their online transition, they were going through many, many staff reductions. So when they talked about online, they talked about the limitations and the constraints, and they talked much more about overwork. They focused much more on problems rather than successes. And in 2010, they often talked about online as something that they didn't know why they were doing it. They didn't really understand what was going on. They didn't seem like anything was different in terms of the paper. It just seemed, for a lot of people, like busy work, basically. So between 2010 and 2013, they went through, like La Presse, they went through much more of an updating and a revision to their site, but it was really a centralized system created by the Post Media chain that owned them for creating a chain-wide look. And that centralized system led to a lot of further disgruntlement. People felt like the centralized CMS that they had to use was clunky, that they were constrained in terms of what they could do with online, and they again articulated themselves in terms of limitations. They said things like, we're still mostly a print paper, we're doing more things online, but the reduction in staff, labor conditions are much more important than anything that happened online. So at La Presse, the transition didn't create an unsustainable workload, so people were happy about that. Staff believed management had made an investment in the future of La Presse as an institution. Whereas at the Gazette, the push towards online resulted in overwork, and digital decisions reflected the priorities of the chain and not the Gazette. Now, there are a lot of limitations to what we did. We, as I said, we went there when La Presse was going through this very unique period of transition. Very remarkable, and we didn't look at other Francophone papers. For example, Quebecor's train has gone through a lot of digital transition and a lot of labor suppression at the same time. And we didn't talk to the iPad team because we were following the same group of people in 2010, 2013. But I think one of the things that comes up in our study is that rather than confirming this additional idea of a digital divide, our interviews demonstrate this complex interplay between workplace attitudes and workplace conditions and attitudes towards online work. Things are a lot more complicated than just looking at markets. Also, if anyone's interested in a longer version of this paper, because I cut it down by 4,000 words to squeeze it in to the journal, just give me an email and I can send it along.